Um, so what's really happened since this movie came out, other than me spending a lot of time with this guy, which is actually a great pleasure, is that so many people started to come to us over the months and even years following the making of the movie, who had new stories and new things to relate. You know, because you adopt a story like this and suddenly you're the person that knows it, and everybody comes to you because, you know, people who probably should have spoken to you when you were making the movie and then feel guilty later, or just people who have some crisis of conscience and then come to you and say, well, I always had this story, or I always knew about this thing. You know, we'll come to you and say, I have something to say about your movie, or I have something to say about the story. And so that happened a lot in the months and years following. And it just became more and more clear that no matter what you believed about the Friedmans, or whether they were annoying, which sometimes they are. Sorry, I'm not saying all Friedman. We had this, I can't remember, but some very close friend of mine had seen the film like at Sundance many years ago and called me the next day and said, get these people out of my head. And I sort of understood that, but you know, I guess I developed a different relationship with Jesse because I think that he was, you know, kind of the least self-involved Friedman in a lot of ways, and was kind of the little kid that was coming along after the family had been through many of its chapters. And so the more people talked to me and said, you know, let me tell you what really happened. The police came to my house, and I was a student in the computer classes, and they visited me, you know, I think it was 15 times. And I would say, wait, the police visited you 15 times? Yeah. Well, what did you say to them? Well, I told them that nothing happened to me in the classes, but, you know, they said they already knew, so they were just going to come back until I said what they wanted me to say. And I would say, well, how long did they stay when they visited you? And they would say, well, I don't know, sometimes it was 7 hours or 9 hours in my house when I was 8 years old, and my parents, you know, were asked not to be in the room, and so they would just sit with me for 7 hours. It was so amazing to me that these things had happened that I guess it just gradually made it clearer and clearer to me that the relative ambiguity that's in the film was, you know, in some way being replaced in my mind by just the vision of how awful the police work had been, and how disastrous the miscarriage of justice had been, particularly for Jesse. You know, I always felt like Arnold was a hard guy to redeem because he admits to a lot of things that are unpleasant and not things that we want to condone. But I never felt that way about Jesse, and then the more I started talking to these people, the more I felt that I needed to be more engaged. And so in the years, to answer your question, Tom, in the years that followed, we just started to, you know, we did more and more in terms of investigating the case and just collecting all the various people who would come forward. And all those people who came forward had some story that pointed to Jesse's innocence. And nobody ever came to me, other than that one boy in the film who's kind of reclining and talks about having been hypnotized. He was the only person that ever said to me, I have my own independent recollection of having been harmed by these people, and certainly not by Jesse. So anyway, having done all that stuff, you know, we started to realize that there was going to be a legal process, and that Jesse was going to appeal his conviction based on what was the evidence in the film, and that happened in around 2004, maybe a year after the movie came out. And then it took about 6 years before he got through and we got through a lot of being rebuffed by the Nassau County District Attorney, who just didn't want to hear anything else about the case. And then finally, 2010, they got the case in front of the Second Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals, and they came out with this amazing verdict where they really did the homework, and they said there's a reasonable likelihood this is a wrongful conviction. We think the district attorney in Nassau County ought to take another look at the case. So that was a big explosion, and everybody in Nassau County was very angry, but it really led to a whole resurgence of interest in the case, and people starting to really do their homework, which is a process that we're still in right now.
So a few bullet points here. The Nassau County District Attorney Kathleen Rice issued a report this summer where that basically upheld the conviction of Jesse. Your hopes for seeing this kind of reopened, re-questioned were kind of squelched by Kathleen Rice. Then subsequent to that, Jesse, I understand that your lawyers have filed a defamation suit against, is it against the DA's office?
It names Kathleen Rice and there are 2 different press spokespeople as defendants.
But just to clarify,
can you clarify for me, like what your problems are with the DA's report?
Well, I think it's important to note that before the DA's report came out, we said like 100 times, it's not going to be a fair report, because for a district attorney to take upon herself the reviewing of her office's work is an absurdity and not something that you can in any way rely on. It's an idiocy that we now see happening in this case under Joe Hines right now in Brooklyn. They got this detective with 170 murder convictions in his glorious career, and later on it turns out that this one crack-addicted prostitute happened to have been the witness to 6 different murders. She was just the most unlucky prostitute in the world. He saw so many different people that were all killed, and she managed to get into court and testify. This thing is starting to become a thing where district attorneys are saying, we'll handle it. We understand that a conviction review may be necessary, that this might not have been fairly adjudicated, but we don't need a court. We'll just do it ourselves. And lo and behold, they kind of come out with the report that we anticipated they would come out with, which is Jesse's even more guilty, and yes, it's true, we didn't really get access to any of the evidence, and yeah, it's true, we took 3 years to do less work than the filmmakers had done in 2 months. So we weren't very surprised that the DA came out with a negative report. What was great about it is that it sort of forced the district attorney to show her hand. And once she showed her hand and put a whole bunch of claims in the report that were patently, demonstrably false, we were in a position to show that to a judge. And the judge just recently, in the last couple months, came out with another scathing decision and said, this country has no respect for its institutions, and you guys need to now give over all the documents that you've withheld in this case, and there's no way we can have any faith in this DA's report. We got to see everything. So it was all part of the process in a way. I mean, not that it wouldn't have been great if somebody said, oh, the same DA that prosecuted Jesse Friedman just decided that her office made a terrible mistake. But it would have been a little bit of a fantasy. I don't think they would have done that. I think we're now in a much better position to get the case overturned with the report at hand. So
there's a couple things going on now. This other judge has said you've got to turn over material that was part of this research process. And is there a timeline on that?
The DA has until Halloween to file their appeal of the lower court's order. We get a chance to respond, and then we wait on the appellate division to make a determination. It's a legal process, and it takes months, if not years. Hopefully it will just be months, and then we'll know something. At the moment, the judge's order to release the documents is held pending a stay while the DA gets to appeal.
So something else that came out in this process when there was news reports about the shortly after the DA's report, one of the kind of glaring things in those news reports was that the DA or someone had found pornography in Jesse's prison cell, like really odious stuff that they claimed Jesse had written, and this was reported in newspaper articles, tabloid articles. And Andrew, talk about that.
Well, this turned out to be a great thing for us. I know that sounds really counterintuitive, and it's not often that you get really excited about child pornography. But I would say that the situation in this case was so extraordinary because the DA took this incredible misstep, which was that there had been a disciplinary report at some point that said that they had found pornography in an evidence locker in the prison that Jesse was in. And I think they sort of automatically assumed that he had something to do with it. And then about 2 months later, they had a hearing after he had, well, 3 months later, after Jesse had been put in solitary confinement for 3 months. They then had a hearing and asked him questions about the pornography and looked at it and said, oh, he was found not guilty. In fact, he didn't possess it, he didn't write it, he didn't distribute it. So it was a total fabrication, this thing. But what was great about it is that they were incautious enough to put it really front and center in their report. And the argument was that we don't really know anything more about Jesse's crimes. It was a long time ago, and who can really look at all those details? But what we do know is that he was writing this terrible pedophilia-oriented pornography in prison, and therefore he's kind of a pervert. So who needs to go through this whole report? You know, obviously he's a bad guy, so let's just... And very quickly what we did was, you know, we woke up the morning that this allegation came out, and you know, we took and we found this pornography that had been sent to a member of the press. And we just took one of the lines of pornography, put it in Google, and instantly pressed, you know, search, and it came up, and it said, Lisa Beenan's porn blog. You know, we love stories about pedophilia. And I thought, is it possible that the district attorney took 3 years to write this report, and that her flagship claim in the report is that Jesse is a child pornographer himself, and he wrote child pornography? And that just was something she didn't check by Googling it? And that's really how it came out. That's true. She didn't check it. And then once you learn more about it, you find out, well, this piece of pornography was actually printed on a fancy laser printer, which of course Jesse didn't have access to in prison. And it had an email address that you could email this woman and if you wanted to have more pornography like it. And of course, prisoners at Coxsackie don't have access to email. So what she did was so incautious that it created an opportunity, I think, for us to show that there were dozens of claims in the report that were that poorly researched, that were that incorrect. Is that a fair